Hello, I'm Amira, the Assistant Editor of Water and Wastewater Asia, bringing you the latest insights about the water industry for the water industry. In this interview, I'll be speaking to Rod Naylor, who is GHD's Global Water Lead. We'll be discussing about global water leadership, the hurdles of digital transformation, and integrated water management. He covers the crucial role of water in connecting communities, economies, and ecosystems, while emphasizing the need for sustainability amidst growing climate change challenges. Let's hear Rod's insights about intergenerational attitudes towards infrastructure, necessity for public engagement in sustainable water management, and the upcoming presentation of GHD's Crossroad Research at COP29 this November. We can start off with telling us your role as Global Water Lead at GHD and how you implement the global business strategy to deliver the client value and the lasting community benefit.
Yeah, okay. So my role is global at GHD. Global Water Lead is the term that we use. And it's a strategic role that works right across GHD's global business. And what I do is I work with our national water market leads in each country to connect up our business globally around water and help it look forward and orient for what's coming down the track. So we're focused very much on what will happen in the next few years, where we need to invest, and the important conversations that we seek to have with clients and with communities about the future of water in their city, in their town, with their business, and what they need to think about and plan for going ahead. And that way, working right across the globe, my job really is to make sure that I bring the best of GHD to every country and every client, rather than having the locals knowing what they know, helping the locals know what everybody in GHD knows. That's the main part of my job. So I guess the philosophy we take is that water is the ultimate connector of communities and economies and the environment. And it's on a global scale even, right, as demonstrated by the impacts of climate change. If you look at the UN numbers, like 75 or even 85% of the lived and experienced effects of climate change are experienced through the water cycle. So that global connectivity is really important. But the most important thing is that even though it's global, water is actually hyper-local. So there's global trends where there are floods and droughts happening globally, but how they appear and the risks and the implications of them are absolutely hyper-local in every location, every community, every circumstance. And that's why bringing global knowledge to those local challenges is, I think, really powerful in what we do at GHD. And I'm really privileged to have a job that's my job to actually help to do that and to bring, therefore, but by doing that, bringing the best, helping communities to be more sustainable and prepared for the future. And that's not just environmentally sustainable, it's socially sustainable and economically sustainable as well, because, fixing water has an impact. It doesn't necessarily fix, but has a really powerful impact on all three of those I feel like pillars of sustainability.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice incorporation of because climate change, it's everyone's feeling the effect, and just trying to localize the understanding of climate change to different communities. I think that's what you do, right?
Exactly. Helping people understand, explore, but then helping solution locally. The solutions in different places are different and require local knowledge, local engagement. It's not just a technical solution, it's a socio-technological challenge to respond. And that's the way we think about it, particularly as you noted now with our purpose to make communities sustainable for generations to come. We have to bring the social element into that. It's no point building them a big concrete thing and telling them it's good for them, especially with the uncertainty of climate change, because actually it might not be, because we might have got it wrong. So there's different and better ways. I think another part of that is the interaction, the social technical interaction is an important in terms of designing solutions, but also in terms of being able to adapt to as climate change happens, right? So it's not that you build a dam and it's fixed for 100 years. It has implications socially, and the social implications back for the way the dam is used, understood, accepted, and the implications for it. So there's a sort of beautiful dance between the technical and the social, and sitting at the edge is a great privilege to have a job that lets me do that, and to do that globally. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Really nice. Yeah, I think this will be a nice follow-up to the next question, which is about the global water sector trends and the challenges. And perhaps can you give us some examples of how you and GHD tackle these problems?
Sure. I think there's three I'd like to talk about that are prevalent. One is climate change, obviously. Another one is the challenge at the moment of the increased investment. People are starting to wake up and realize these interconnections and these needs and the importance of water. So that's driving an incredible, boom's the wrong term, but an incredible surge in the needs around water and therefore the investment and the capacity needed. And I think I also need to cover digital transformation because it's really critical in that, potentially really powerful, but the water industry is not there yet. So despite all the promise, we're not turned. So, climate change is really, as we mentioned, driving transformation. It's driving impacts for people. We published a piece of work a couple of years ago that I think is really useful in this context, which was called Economics. And it's one of the things that would be great to maybe share. And it looked at the economic effect or the economic impact of floods, droughts, and storms through climate change, the increased prevalence out to 2050 for 7 countries where we live. And it came up with an incredible number in trillions of the impact, the financial impact on economies, which helps to make policy conversations about what needs to happen. But obviously, that economic impact and the connection also has social impacts and environmental impacts as well. That piece of work we've been really useful. We've been able to take that to COP27 and 28 and initiate conversations around the risk, if you like, of not acting and not operating now. So that's one of the ways we've been able to, if you like, contribute to the debate and help accelerate the understanding that follows through to, hopefully, better responses by government agencies, by private companies to this sort of global interconnectivity, but local risk of climate change on water. And as I mentioned, the way we approach that, obviously everybody's focused on building sustainability and resilience, but what does that mean? And how do you nail resilience for 50 years in the uncertainty of climate change?
Yeah.
And that's where systems thinking, actually considering it as an integrated, connected system, like I was describing before, is really critical. And also having an adaptive mindset and using adaptive methodologies, not to pretend that we're the experts and we know now what needs to happen for the next 50 years. We don't. So how do we build in adaptability, options, and choices? And importantly, how do we bring generational equity and social conversations into that? So we're not, making decisions on behalf of other people regardless. We're actually engaging people, because I think it's fair to say the future of those solutions don't require just an agency to build a thing. They're going to require us to live and operate and behave in our environment differently because of climate change. Now, whether that's heat island effects or increased flooding and rains, we'll be required to behave differently in sync with the infrastructure that we build to manage water. So ignoring the human part would be an absolute tragedy and would ensure that we are wasteful and slow and not as effective in building resilience and sustainability and protecting people and communities as we might be. So that's the thinking that we like to try and bring, the conversations that we engender with communities and with our clients. And some of the most rewarding things, that we get to do are when we're able to implement projects that actually achieve those goals and achieve the in sync, I guess, in connection with the community that we're serving. A lot of that leads to a huge increase in capital spending worldwide, like particularly in the North Americas, in the UK, in Australia. We've just finished doing some strategic planning, a look at the economic analysis and the surge in the need for capital investment to respond to climate change, but to also respond to growing populations worldwide at the same time, and also to respond to the shifting community expectations, that community theme. A really powerful example of that at the moment is the UK over the last 6 months, with an incredible change in expectation post-COVID around sewer overflows and environmental impacts. To fix that in a conventional method of we'll build a different system is trillions of pounds and decades. The best way to deal with that is to talk with community and actually find ways to engage and understand community behaviours that might mitigate and reduce the impacts, and shifting community expectations about the implication of the way we live and the way we're going to have to manage that. It drives a whole different profile of the kind of spending that's coming down the pipe towards us, if you'll excuse the pun. And we're seeing that, I guess, the first challenge for that is actually funding that. So it takes money, depending on the governance and the industry structure. In some locations, that falls to government. In most situations, that falls to consumers at the end to pay, and whether that's directly through economic regulation or not, the living challenges at the moment. So we know we've got to respond to these things. We know there's a big cost, and we know that someone's going to have to pay. So that's creating a huge tension around funding. But there's another big challenge, even if you've got the funding, is getting the capacity to actually do these things. So supply chains are stretched. The number of capable and capacity of capable contractors, engineers, designers to be able to implement these assets is also a huge strain on the industry at the moment, finding enough skilled and capable people to be able to implement this work. And that's driving us and a lot of others to rethinking how we deliver work. So we're really focusing on automation and standardization. How can we actually deliver more of the engineering and planning work without having to have proportionately more people? How can we use digital systems and processes to accelerate, to almost recycle the work and to prioritize the work so we can actually get more work flowing? We're also seeing a lot of conversation, a lot of change around so rethinking the relationship with the supply chain for utilities or for cities. How do we build more collaborative models? How do we take friction and conflict out of the commercial relationship? So how do we drive to deliver more productive outcomes? I also think there's an element here in community engagement, so that we're not in a situation of a community battle for 5 years to get a project approved, but we're actually understanding of the needs. We've got an unstable internet, of the needs of infrastructure, but also, as I said, the potential rethinking how we experience, behave, relate to, and use the infrastructure as well, I think is a really important part of that solution. So they're the ways we're looking to try and deal with that challenge of delivering more for less in the context of we need more to happen, and there's only so much capability and capacity. Probably the third one, the final one, digital transformation is one where we, like everybody else, we've been really working quite hard on how we actually get that to happen. Honestly, the water industry has been really slow compared to other industries in that adoption, and that's for a few reasons. One of them is it's an inherently conservative industry. We are talking about environmental impact. We're talking about public health and the impact on people, but that's not the only reason, and that doesn't fully explain the reticence. We've also got, by and large, an industry that does not have the competitive pressures of other industries that we compare against. So if I'm in the airline industry and I'm not providing customer service through digital systems as well, or the credit card industry, consumers will decide that my service is not as good and not as effective as others, and will change. That consumer choice is limited in water. And I think that's one of the reasons why transformation hasn't happened as rapidly. But we are starting to see that shift happening. And I think there's huge opportunity once we work it out. But I think there's a long way to go with doing that. The digital capabilities exist. It's the organizational, cultural, transformational elements, including the cultural belief and the need that we have to focus on, I think, for the next 5 or 10 years to get that. And that's where our energies are going. We know the technological solutions exist. So the technological social nexus, how do we get the social, psychological, people and organizational phases to work so that we can take advantage of digital technologies, by and large, to address those first two, the change of the climate and the need to do more about it, the change in community expectation and the need to accommodate sustainably, equitably, more and more people on the planet.
Thank you so much. I think that's really, really insightful. I didn't think about the consumer's choice that being a factor. The one that I just thought it was just the industry being conservative in general. That was really insightful. I think just picking on that point, right? I'll just skip a few questions and I'll go towards the point in Southeast Asia and digital transformation here, because I think, what is your advice to the water companies here? Because different countries have different level of funding, and when it comes to keeping up with the rapid changes of digital transformation here, what is your advice?
Yeah, look, there's a few things I think will help in terms of the high level approach and strategy and philosophy around this. The first, and it does go to the people on the sociological side for me, is collaborate with others. I've been in the industry a long time, and I've seen so many one-off discrete solutions, pilots, independents who are not collaborating, learning and sharing. So I think collaboration is really critical, not to have an attitude, we'll do it all ourselves because we're in control. The beauty of not being in such a competitive environment where consumers will walk is the opportunity is open for collaboration. We see that really, really effective in Australia through the Water Services Association, being very collaborative, engaged. We don't see that so much in other markets, I have to admit. That openness to collaboration, that's collaboration with peers, critically collaboration with supply chain, both solution providers, so to be open to actually piloting new things, and also with advisors. Companies don't want to get locked in to a solution and not have anywhere to move. And procurement and governance is really important. But what I see as a huge lack in the ability to implement digital solutions in the water industry is an unwillingness to innovate and engage with the supply chain openly in an innovative way. Corporate governance or government procurement tends to say, well, we need to know the solution and we'll tender that as a solution that's fixed. And we cut out the opportunity for innovation and learning. So I think there's scope there to collaborate and to think more about the opportunity for innovation learning. We did some work recently with Northumbrian Water Group in the UK, who are great. They have an annual innovation festival, which is a fantastic event to be at, but it's constructed in order to remove those constraints and obligations around and allow innovation to happen and to be piloted. And then Northumbrian Water welcome that ecosystem of innovators in to pilot and to test things. And they're quite comfortable that when what they find works will be shared elsewhere, and the supply chain will then take the opportunity of that investment in time and risk by Northumbrian Water and take it elsewhere in the market. So it's a really great example of changing those rules that put constraints around digital transformation. I think also, there's got to be a realistic understanding that digital transformation, as you mentioned, is rapid. Things will change. You need to be agile and be prepared to invest, learn, adapt, and reinvest, not to take sort of an old school engineering view, a bit like we talked about before, of saying, I'll buy a thing and that will be resolved and the same. We see more and more legacy systems, I guess, in smart metering in particular, people who 5, 10, 15 years ago invested in smart metering systems that are very constrained, they become legacy, and they haven't taken an adaptive and of evolution. They've sort of locked it in and haven't moved forward to be more creative about how that evolves and adapts over time. So I think a mindset of agile adaptation is really critical. But I think probably the most important one, I'll get back to a similar theme here, is the people and the culture. There's no use having a machine in the corner that can do everything if nobody uses it. So getting people to find and understand and believe and engage in using digital processes and systems in their ways of working, I think is a really critical part. And that's a key area where we as GHD are focusing. We have technical solutions, but we're aware of so many in the market. We're not pretending that we're going to out tech or out arms race the technical. We see ourselves as helping utilities to understand that ecosystem, prioritize what's good now without worrying too much about what'll be better later, but keeping the door open to it, and to be able to do the implementation and transformation piece to get those systems operational in the organization and having an impact and being used by people, I think is the most transformational piece that I've seen we've not been very good at as an industry globally. I think we're starting to learn, but I think that could be a really transformational change for us.
Thanks, Rod. Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And I just wanted to know how GHD assures, your clients about, say, the challenges of digital transformation, things like cybersecurity and data protection. How do you guys go about it?
Well, I'm not an expert on cybersecurity and data protection. I don't think water is specifically different to a whole lot of other applications around cybersecurity and the technical side of cybersecurity. Many jurisdictions already have regulations, legislation requirements. Certainly here in Australia, in the US, there are what we'll call contemporary rules and requirements around the mechanics of cybersecurity. Yeah, well, we're able to make those assessments, identify roadmaps, prioritize scope, and even deliver investments in order to comply with those rules, models, frameworks to ensure cybersecurity. My personal view as a water professional is, that's a whole industry that's there and it's able to be pulled in. The key is, how does that affect and get used in the water industry? One of the things I think is, for us, understanding that the soft spot in a lot of those systems is actually people, again, culture, awareness, knowledge, confidence to use it. I think that's one of the sort of hurdles to getting broader implementation of technology, is the comfort to trust our people with these systems. But I think that, again, points to the need for investment in people and systems and processes and knowledge to be able to implement it. We see a huge opportunity in the capital delivery phase, as we discussed before, but even more opportunity downstream in what we call technology-enabled asset management and optimization. So there's technology-enabled asset management, which is sort of starting to happen with optimization models, AI, machine learning to drive performance improvement, carbon reduction, energy reduction. I think there's an opportunity. We add the O on the end of optimization, which gets us back to the idea of resiliency and adaptability as well. We see many opportunities where existing assets, rather than having to be replaced with massive capital, and maybe that's already budgeted in those big capital budgets, there's opportunity to shift the way the asset performs, to optimize, to repurpose. Really importantly, to rethink the relationship between the asset and the community and the way it's used, potentially, to be more adaptive, to give us time to understand climate change and to offset or avert some of those huge capital investments in replacing a big fixed asset with another big fixed asset, and using digital processes. And that will require a change in consumer behavior, but also a change in operations phase behavior of the people in the industry that are responsible for those assets. Getting away from the idea it's concrete, it's built, it happens. to repurposing and reprioritizing how assets work. So in all of that, obviously cybersecurity is critical, and it's ubiquitous in the work that we do. But for me, you've still got that challenge of actually, making it happen and making sure it's not a constraint or an obstacle to making it happen, that we actually empower people and show them how to be safe.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're an expert in that as well, even though, yeah, just also want to follow up on SIWW. I think I know you've attended the Singapore International Water Week. I wanted to know your insights and your takeaways from that, as well as because there's a huge focus and emphasis in Singapore with climate change. I think coastal resilience is a big thing from SIWW. So what is the advice that you give for us when it comes to mitigation and the adaptation?
I think the first place I go to is that systems thinking and the idea of integration, integrated water management. So we mentioned water is an interconnected system. Water, people, economies, environment are all connected through this great connectivity. The circumstance in Singapore is different to circumstances elsewhere, but the connectivity and the integration and planning is really critical, I think, for me, to not think of one part of the problem and implement a solution that creates another problem somewhere else that requires more capital. Now, that's hard to do. There's no question about that. The more complex you make the system, but I think that leads you to much more elegant solutions. And yeah, I get really excited when engineering delivers elegance and art, right? And rather than mass concrete and an edict that we fixed it because we built something, that there's a subtlety, there's a need to be engaged with community belief, culture in doing these things. So we see that in Australia with a rising understanding of our Indigenous culture and the opportunity to rethink how systems work and allow nature to take a stronger role rather than a man-made approach to reorganizing nature because we've got one part of the system. If we look at there's many examples around the world where we've done that over 50 years and we've now got a disaster. Like the Murray-Darling Basin, we built dams in so many places in order to drive agriculture. Now we're finding that the dams, constraining beach nourishment and disadvantaged communities downstream are losing their beaches for recreation because we built a dam for 40, 50 years ago. So that long-term implication and the role of nature, that integrated approach is really important, I think. Another one is that adaptive thing, the idea of, well, what do we need to do now to keep our options open? Climate change is really uncertain, right? The science has a degree of uncertainty, but the biggest uncertainty is what we'll do as humanity. Will we reduce emissions or won't we? New South Wales government this week released predictions of the predicted climate path and what happens if we don't hit it, and the implications for heat in Western Sydney and the social equity and livability of Western Sydney are profound between those two variabilities. What do you design for? Will we attenuate carbon and constrain climate change, or will we go? So in trying to do it, I think you need to be adaptive and you need to be scenario focused on what could be. And with those scenarios, what are the options that we're not closing off, but we're not expending huge amounts of capital now on solutions that may or may not be operating later? I think that's really critical. I really applaud Singapore's approach to integrating coastal protection in with the PUB and water. That, to me, that's at the highest organizational level understanding of that need for integrated and systems thinking, which is fantastic, and understanding those integrated implications. The New York City Department of Environmental Protection's made the same decision. I was speaking with them a couple of months ago in New York City as well, and the new commissioner. And we're seeing some of the leading agencies like New York City DEP and like Singapore Water actually leading in this way, which is really encouraging for us. That doesn't mean they've got all solutions. It's complex and there's a long way to go. But that was one of my key takeaways, seeing Singapore, like New York City, addressing that, understanding they need to go further than conventional thinking and being integrated in the approach. I think that will bear fruit going forward. And doing that in the cognizance that climate change is here, but it's uncertain and we need to deal with the uncertainty, not refuse to acknowledge that's there.
Thank you. I think, could you share so perhaps any parallels in Australia and Singapore with the way we handle water, or is there any ways that we can also take away from in Australia?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a long history between Australia and Singapore. A lot of my friends and colleagues that I started my career with late last century were involved in some of the early advanced recycling and other advanced technology projects in Singapore. And Singapore was a place where a lot of Australian technology found an opportunity to develop and grow, a bit like we were talking about with the need to collaborate in terms of digital technology. So it's much more treatment and technical technology. Then a lot of my friends and colleagues spent time in Singapore, and early plants like Kranji and others were developed using those technologies, which then have blossomed and gone around the world. So there's that history. Hang on a moment. You can get that, yeah. So we've got that shared history in terms of technology and engagement. I think both countries, although we're organized differently in terms of the water industry, have been very advanced in terms of thinking and engagement and contribution to global water policy and global water strategy. I think I'd consider, Singapore and Australia, maybe we're two of the top three. I wouldn't try and name the third in terms of our acknowledgement of the needs and response to climate change, the need to respond to water security, looking at recycling in particular and desalination, the integration and adoption of circular economies, and to find ways to serve the community better. They're really strong parallels between Australia and Singapore. And that's part of the reason why I think, when we go to Singapore Water Week, there's a lot of Australian interest. A lot of the major water utilities in Australia are present and were present in Singapore last time. And, you'll find that most of the Australian people in the technology and supply chain side are also very familiar with Singaporean companies and with Singaporean experience and projects. So I think there's a really strong synergy between the two. Also helps to be in a sort of similar time zone, I have to say, when you're operating worldwide. But and I guess we look forward to more of it. Right now, I think water recycling and potable recycled water is the sort of key area of evolution and development. We're on different paths there in terms of community acceptance. New water was driven pretty hard in terms of positioning.
Yeah.
But there's not so much actual new water in the system yet. Most of Singapore's recycled water actually goes to industry and other uses, although a small proportion does go to potable. Speaking to people from PUB when I was up there at the last conference, that's changing, but maybe there's a little gap in terms of adaptability. The cost now of repiping and reorienting that back towards potable recycling is actually quite a profound challenge for Singapore in terms of the cost of, because we plumbed it for recycling in other areas, and now to make it adaptable and be able to cross back into the water system is actually not as simple as you might imagine for Singapore. In Australia, we've done a lot of work on the same challenges. What's the best choices and solutions? Some really wonderful work by WASA actually that identified PRW as a more cost-effective approach once we get community acceptance and understanding. Technologically, we can do it, no question, but it's a techno-social interface that is the constraint. Although, there are also, the needs for funding to make these things happen. So I think we're both on a bit of an adventure and a journey together, and the level of collaboration between Singapore and Australia through Singapore Water Week, but otherwise is actually really encouraging, a great showcase for collaboration in the industry.
I think you're really spot on about the social impact. I actually went to the new water factory as a school excursion back then, but I think a lot of my peers were just not convinced about about drinking water. But I could definitely tell like the government, the schools were all trying to implement, but I think the social shift, it really takes a lot of effort to convince people.
It does. We've got a way to go, but we're on a journey, and things like New Water were a part. So is New Brew. If you're familiar with the beer that's brewed as well, I've done my research on New Brew as well, and it's also good. We've got an evolution of potable recycled water starting to happen in Australia now. Still some different policies, different perspectives where we are state by state. There's some very different policy on it. Sydney has an adaptive plan for its water security over the next 40, 50 years, and appropriately addresses the potential and future use of potable recycled water and where it fits into a decision matrix of adaptability. It's not necessary yet, so no need to do it. We're in an engagement and understanding phase. And if the adaptive choices, I hope, maybe mean that Sydney's choice then when we make a change is slightly better planned, and maybe the financial hurdle to adopt it broadly will be a little less than Singapore, because we've got better at adaptive planning, I think, since Singapore bit the bullet with New Water. We've had the advantage of some more years of learning that may make it a little easier. We've got the same challenge, but this is where I think there's real scope for the water industry globally, the essential element of people's consumption, and move away the idea that your water and sewage system is something that's hardwired, you can't change it and push the button or turn the tap, and move to a better understanding of your system, the environment, the economy, and recycle. Thinking more about having people up the opportunity system and have a feedback loop, and they can personally contribute rather than being told, the engineers have built a concrete thing, you don't need to know 60 years ago. I think we're becoming more aware, as we are with other elements of climate, the ability to go out in summer when it's too heat affected areas changes your behavior, your understanding. We need to bring water into that connected conversation as well. I think that's something that'll happen, but will happen in the next few decades. But it's a really critical part, I think, of what will be enforced upon us, but also the need of how we adaptively and most effectively mitigate and meet climate change challenges. Pretending that someone will build a thing that fixes it, it's nice and easy to believe, but it's not true. We'll need social technological change.
I think we're just left with one more, which is about the upcoming projects in the next half of 2024. Anything that you can share with our readers?
Upper South Creek project here in Sydney. This is where the agenda to do more with recycling and operate the water system better in Sydney is something I spent a couple of decades not directly being responsible for, but certainly being involved in the conversations, being able to contribute. In my previous career, was involved in some of the early water recycling plants that were experiments in learning. The South Creek project in Western Sydney is built of the growth in Western Sydney, about 800,000 people around the new Western Sydney airport in Western Sydney CBD. As that's a long way from the coast and suffers particularly heat island effect in the summertime, and I guess doesn't have the same economic advantages of the east and the city. So the Upper South Creek, critical piece, not the whole piece, but a critical piece of that interconnected system where water has an important role in supporting the economic development and growth in that part of the city. We need to be able to provide water supply, but in this case, much more importantly, to be able to actually manage wastewater and waste disposal. And from industry and employment and economy in Western Sydney, an incredibly expensive job to then take that waste away for capacity to naturally treat the nutrient and pollution load that would come from that. So actually do what Sydney does with a lot of its waste, which is take it to ocean disposal, in terms of water recycling, very much like Singapore, is an enabler for the economic growth and to fix the water system. But it also then has a social benefit in terms of the economic opportunity and jobs. But importantly, most of that water in the short term will be fed back to some to food production, but mostly back into green and blue space and infrastructure, providing natural infrastructure and space, managing heat island, creating beautiful blue and green places to live and to play and to be, and improving social equality in Western Sydney. So there's a beautiful social event and story there. It's a project that also ultimately, because of the way it's planned, it recycles water, it recovers energy, so it's very circular in its thinking, but it has the ability to adapt in the future and may well become, it's not committed, it's a choice, part of a total recycled water program as well, so that water can move to a higher use and adaptive strategy. And for that, I think it's a really great example of a lot of things we've been talking about, the response to population growth, but also to climate change impact in Western Sydney, the need to connect economy, environment, and people, social, into these projects, the enabling power of water and the water system to support that. Then that'll be a failure and have huge implications socially and environmentally and potentially economically if we don't do these things. And that's the role of the water utility, but it is hyper-local. It's in the context of Western Sydney, particularly some huge, historically, real issues with drought in Sydney as well. So we've got a desalination plant already, but this is part of an integrated suite of adaptive, integrated planning, which, we're doing part of it as GHD. We're part of the team, John Holland and with Jacobs, in an integrated collaborative team. But personally, I'm really proud that we're involved in it, and it's the city that I live in, and we're doing some of the things I think we need to do to be sustainable for the future.
That's great to hear. I think for us, it will be, I'm thinking of the East Coast Park. I think the government has made it recreational, but also from a way to help with our coastal resilience. So I think it's great to hear that countries are thinking of complex solutions to tackle everything and involving, I think the social aspect you have emphasized more than enough. I think it's really clear.
Enough. Yeah, there's one element that we didn't talk about, I think is important here, and that's in the thinking about circular economies. So, this is an evolving sort of, these projects are part of a circular thinking and a progression towards circular economy. They're not fully circular yet. What I find, and historically the water industry has a bit of a view that we do circular economy because we do recycling. But at the highest level, recycling is not the first and most powerful part of circular economy. Eliminating waste in the first place is critical. So I've always sort of been a keen advocate for first considering water efficiency, or another way to think about it is water productivity, getting more value for communities, value for economies per litre of water out rather than wasting it in the first instance. To me, that's really powerful circular economy. Lots of companies really starting to get on that bandwagon. Some really important big global companies that are not as well. So we haven't made as much progress there commercially, but water stewardship and some organizations have been fantastic, and there's a growing understanding of this connectivity and need. And once you've done the reducing waste and maximizing the value, then you get to recycling and keeping materials in circle. And that's where these projects, I think, are really powerful. But the one that I'm most motivated about is the next step, if you like, if there's three principles, and that's regeneration. So, we spent a lot of years getting to the point of wanting to be sustainable. If you like, we've come down a curve of damage, and we want to bottom out and be sustainable. That's not good enough. What we need to do is put it back. We need to regenerate. Being, getting worse and worse until we stop being worse, I don't think is a satisfactory outcome for humanity, for people, for communities, for intergenerational equity. particularly, that's not enough to say, well, we'll just keep getting worse until we slow it up and pull up way down
Yeah.
here where it's really not great. How do we put it back? And examples like the one that you just did, using mangroves and parks for coastal protection is a response to climate change that brings blue-green infrastructure in, but it's also rebuilding nature and regenerating the natural environment, regenerating also social equity and opportunity. They're the ones that I'm really excited about in terms of pulling right through to regeneration and actually giving back and doing better. And I think that's the future of the water industry. We're on a trajectory to getting there, but we've still got a little way to go before that's the norm. But at least now it's shown that it's possible, and I think it's something we should all be aspiring to. If there's a high bar for how that connectivity, how the water industry contribute, how do we build back to regenerative? And when we're on a regenerative, even if it takes a long time, I think then we're on a path to true sustainability and equity.
That's so enlightening. I think when you said it's not circular, even though everyone says it's circular, now I see it. It's closing the loop. It's really making sure it's regenerative. And yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Rod.
no problem. Well, I'll be on that. You see, circular economy, and you think about loops inside loops. Closing a loop is not a circular economy. Recycling is a loop, but the regenerative loop, right? The macro loop is the really powerful and important one. So, and I think, understanding that, and when that becomes part of social understanding and expectation and ethos,
Mhm.
that's when we start to get to the opportunity for people to think differently and understand, oh, right, that's why I should consider drinking recycled water. Because in the big picture, I need to not be
Yeah.
damaging and making the place. When they're worried about the yuck factor, they're not thinking in that global level. So there's a long way to go in understanding circular economy, but I think it's a wonderful model for helping to move us forward. Maybe there's better ones. We'll find them in time.
Yeah, and I think definitely about culture and how people just sometimes forget conveniently that water runs out, like clean water runs out. Yeah, I think that narrative should be ingrained more for people to understand the implications, and like what you said, for future generations to actually see nature as how we see it.
Yeah. So there's one more thing actually I might mention on that issue of future generations, which I think is really at the nub of this idea of regeneration and the big circle. As GHD, we've also done a piece of research lately called Crossroads, which looked at intergenerational attitudes. We surveyed 10,000 people around the world, looking at intergenerational attitudes and different national attitudes towards infrastructure and sustainability. And it's really informative in terms of understanding the difference in those attitudes worldwide in terms of different nations. A lot of the new economies and emerging economies are actually much more
Mhm.
positive around our ability to do this and our willingness to do this than some of the older economies. It was a really interesting finding for me. You'll probably find in some of those older economies there's a bit of an arrogance, or we know better kind of thing. But the social emotional engagement with people and the will to be better and the positive expectation was actually much more powerful in developing economies and in new economies where there's a different, I guess, national conversation. It was really powerful for me. So one of the things I'd be happy to share is a link to that research Crossroads, because I think you take this argument all the way through to intergenerational and you realize it's the social element of this problem is really, or
Yeah,
of the challenge is really powerful. Techno-social,
yeah,
there's a nice piece of the social. And there's some nice research in there pointing to these differences and pointing to the opportunities then to actually address the social understanding, social engagement. Our governments and our companies and our water utilities will deliver regenerative, social, circular outcomes when the people, in democracies at least, when the people demand it. So
yeah.
there's a long way around for this to make the loop, which is a nice little metaphor too, I guess, for a circle.
Yeah,
All right,
good.
that's all. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rod.